Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Sam's Healing Podcast. My name is Sam. I am thrilled that you have tuned in today. I'm even more happy that a great friend of mine, one of my favorite human beings, has come in today. His name is Max. He is a betrayed male spouse and has willingly come in to share a little bit about his story and just this chapter of his life. So, Max, how are you doing?
I'm great, Sam. I really appreciate the opportunity to have this conversation with you. And likewise, my friend, you two are one of my favorite human beings. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation and have been for days.
Well, when you and I sat at a bar and talked about you coming in to share some of your story, it just sent chills down my body because so many men need to hear what you have to give. And so many women also, as betrayed females, will resonate with your story. It's not just for betrayed males. I think there will be several parallels. But you, over the last few years, have been one of the most courageous men I've known to deal with what you've had to deal with. So why don't you, just for the sake of the viewers and the audience, why don't you take just a little bit of time and share a little snapshot of what's gone on?
Okay, yeah. So a snapshot of my background and my journey toward becoming a so-called betrayed male, which, as any betrayed male or female watching this will know, it is not a journey I ever asked to embark upon. This was a journey that was brought to my life totally out of the blue. And so we have to find our best footing, and sometimes it takes a while to do that. And that journey in and of itself can be a very arduous, painful, and confusing one. My journey began with some suspicions that were provoked by some behaviors by my wife that really finally got me thinking in ways that I had not been in the habit of thinking. Things in ways that perhaps people, for lack of a better word, would describe as paranoia or jealousy or whatever. But yes, my mind had shocked me by going there. This wasn't how I thought about my relationship with my spouse really ever. But those suspicions caused me to spend about a week looking up YouTube videos about how to know if your spouse might be engaging in an affair of some kind. I'm watching those, and increasingly my heart is sinking as I'm listening to the suggestions that people had about the signs to look for, because I basically checked off almost every box. Okay.
Right.
So I was darn near paralyzed to be brought closer to the realization that maybe this is what was going on. Secondly, once I don't want to say I accepted that, that took a much longer, but once I at least recognized that was probably my new reality, I then started watching some videos on how to confront your spouse about your suspicions of infidelity. So the big thing I learned there was how to create a safe space in which to have a conversation like that. It could not be confrontational. It could not be me screaming and wagging my finger. It had to be a welcoming, painful though that was going to be, conversation in which my spouse felt genuinely invited to disclose to me what was really going on. And that's not going to happen if you're combative. I finally was able to prove that this is what was going on with my spouse by getting on her phone and seeing some things that indisputably confirmed that indeed my spouse was having not just one affair, but several with several different partners. Okay. That day, I only scratched the surface of this new reality in my life. I did confront my spouse. I took her aside. Both of us got in my car. I drove around the block on the day that we were supposed to take our children to Disney World, by the way. Okay. That day, we're all getting ready to go. And this is what I had to get off the table before we did that. I have a 5-year-old and a 4-year-old at the time and a 10-year-old. All chipper, 2 daughters waiting to go see Mickey Mouse, but Daddy had to get a little something out of the way first, and that was the fact that Mommy had strayed off the farm. So I brought this to her attention that morning, and one of the things I learned from the YouTube channel videos about how to confront your spouse on a topic as difficult as this one was, be prepared for your spouse to blame you. And that was the first thing that my spouse did was make it my fault. So I'm like, okay, I was expecting that. conversation went okay. Again, no one flipped out. It was so important to me to make that a welcoming environment in which to have that conversation. And then we took our kids to Disney World with this anvil weighing on my heart. Okay.
I mean, let the audience know whether you're listening or you're watching. I mean, we're sitting together and laughing about it just because of the enormity of the pain and the hurt and
Correct.
the just absurdity of it
Good word.
happening. And what you kind of moved past, but I only highlight it because I want other men and also other women to understand they are not alone in their pain, is that you discovered things on the phone that no man should have to discover. And experiencing this absolute just disintegration of the world that you have been living in.
Yes.
If you had to talk about what you felt as a man, let's talk about the nuance of what the betrayed male has to deal with. Because I'm always careful when I do videos, podcasts, when I interview people. Man, I feel so much empathy for the betrayed male because they're so not talked about. They're so not addressed. It's like they're on this little island that nobody knows about. And everybody says, well, when he cheats. And it's like, oh my gosh, my heart breaks. And I try and graciously stop everyone and go, well, there's also betrayed male. So as a betrayed male, what were some of the things that you experienced? Because I really want my other brothers out there to kind of go, okay, I don't feel so alone today.
I'm so glad you asked because it's so important I know it's important because this is exactly what I wanted and needed in the moment that I was going through this complete upheaval of my life. You are absolutely right. It felt as if my very existence was disintegrating before my eyes. I mean, everything I knew about the world I occupied before the moment at which I confirmed that this is the behavior my spouse was engaging in, was gone, was instantly vaporized. And I very abruptly had to accustom myself to a completely new reality I did not ask for. And at that time had no roadmap for navigating on my own. And that's where people in the space occupied by real mentors such as yourself, Sam, became absolutely invaluable to me. It strikes me as I think about how this affected me from the standpoint of a betrayed male, that I'm not sure there's a female equivalent in the English language for the word emasculate or emasculated. It's always been interesting to me that there's no, as far as, and language is what I do. I've got a couple books that I've written. I edit a magazine. I write hundreds of thousands of words a year for. I've taught writing. I've got a master's degree in creative. So language is what's fascinating to me. And it fascinates me that there's no readily available female equivalent for the word emasculated, because I feel like that word really pinpoints the heart, the root of the betrayed male's pain. In my case, Sam, and as you know, every instance of infidelity has its own unique identity, its own unique set of circumstances. And one of the set of circumstances that made mine unique was I didn't find just explicit text messages between my spouse and other men. I found videos, and I watched all of them. And I probably shouldn't have done that. However, whether I watched them or not, I was either going to create images in my mind of these interactions, or I was going to have them produced for me, right? And so what did that make me feel? Yes, it made me feel emasculated, the thought that there was another man out there who was pleasing my spouse in ways that perhaps I hadn't. Leads you down a road of self-blame that I now realize in retrospect is pretty much entirely irrational. Blaming yourself, blaming myself for my spouse's decision to act out in this manner was a totally unreasonable torment to put myself through. But it was absolutely the first place I went, Sam. What you do when you're ruminating as a betrayed male is you ruminate on all the ways in which you were not good enough, you were not good enough in bed or good enough as a man. All the instances in which you failed to emotionally regulate while having any difficult conversations with your spouse, all of those become the reasons that this happened too, which is BS. Did they perhaps contribute in some sliver to the conditions under which your spouse acted out in this way? Quite possibly. Are they the reason this happened? Absolutely not. No. What I realized in retrospect is my spouse's decision to behave in this way was reflective of a certain toxic mindsets, a brokenness within my spouse, a void within my spouse that she was seeking to satisfy or fulfill in ways that one now realizes were immensely destructive. And by the way, as I mentioned earlier, I had two children in this, so that too comes to mind. Was I not just a good enough husband? Did this happen because of that, or was I not there for my kids in the way that this other person is there for his kids? Right? Because both of my wife's affair partners were people with children. So it's the emasculation, Sam, that I found to be at the root of my pain. And yes, shame, because that emasculation, then as a male, you associate that with shame. Well, if I wasn't man enough, if I wasn't good enough, if I wasn't enough, then that's something for me to be ashamed of and embarrassed by. And how do I even tiptoe in the direction of conversing about this with my male friends? Are they going to look at me judgmentally? Who are my safe people? There were very few of them, Sam. This is really tender territory to explore with other men, right?
No, absolutely.
Yeah, go ahead.
And the thing about it, right? And we didn't talk about this on the front end, but I'm so glad that you brought it up because you feel safe enough. But you are an accomplished author. You are a writer. I mean, many men, we would look at you and go, well, if there's anybody in touch with their emotions, if there's anybody that can swoo and woo the female, it would be a writer. I just pretend to be a writer, and I did for several years, writing blogs and all that. I mean, so that's why I call you one of the most courageous men I know, because you have decided to accept your reality and to embrace it. But we haven't talked about this, but your marriage hasn't made it. And it was not because of your unwillingness to forgive or to do work. For those of you that are listening, for those of you that are watching, I can tell you that my good brother Max here was willing to do literally almost anything to save his little family. And I come in contact with far more betrayed males who are willing to try and save their little family than are not. And I hate the fact that most of the situations, greater than at least 70%, in my experience of the time, the unfaithful female is unwilling to do what it takes to heal. And I know that you experienced her unwillingness, and that is something that you have now taken on to help other men, just as a brother, as a support, of helping them understand that even as a betrayed female, right, the principle is still true, that eventually we have to see the signs that they don't want to work on the marriage. Is that fair?
Oh, it's more than fair. I think it's an urgent recognition to face. Should that set of circumstances present itself? How did I come to that realization? Well, we went to a weekend marital summit, during which I found my spouse to be not terribly receptive, not genuinely engaged, and much more committed to vilifying me than in any honest way reviewing her own behaviors and considering ways in which her own change and her own work were going to be absolutely indispensable to the success of what we call us, right? Our marriage, our bond together was not going to survive if we were not both committed to the work and the change to ourselves and the change to us, that without which we were not going to survive. Later on in the year after we went to this marital summit, which, as you know, was not cheap, yeah. We hit an impasse, and I don't even recall, as I'm looking back on it, why it came to this. But we had a conversation about a temporary separation. At that point, I thought, I have no regrets about this at this point, because I know, as you do, Sam, how much work I put into trying to salvage this thing. But At some point, Sam, and you helped me come to this realization, you have to consider the possibility that, and we don't think about it this way, but consider the possibility that your efforts to save the marriage, your efforts to twist this way and turn that way to change these circumstances and help change this other person and help make her do her work is very controlling behavior. We don't think about it that way. But if once I did, that helped me take a step back and think, hold on a second.
Yeah.
Who is doing the lion's share of the work here? Who seems to be objectively more committed to restoring us, to restoring trust, most importantly, in this relationship? Does it scare the hell out of me to consider walking out on this thing, especially with when I have two children who, by the way, subsequently wept in my arms, begging me to come back home? I understand that this is difficult. I've been there, guys. I know that it's hard. But you know, when my wife resumed communication with her affair partner after we went to this marital summit, when I found out through getting the confession out of her that my wife, in the month after I confronted her about that, then slept with someone else, a third dude. Okay. That's when I realized what I am being shown by my spouse is that there is far less interest on her side of the equation to do the work necessary to restore this thing. That's when I decided, Sam, I had to take a big gulp, and I had to I had set the boundary, for example, of asking my wife to cease communication with my affair partner. And now it was time for me to do the much more difficult work of enforcing that boundary. And once I accepted that I had to enforce that boundary and gradually awaken to all the painful implications of that, walking out of that house literally for the last time, leaving my two children in that house after having a conversation with our oldest one about how mommy and daddy are still going to be there for you in these ways, but they're not going to be under the same roof, and having to watch her cry through that conversation. This was extraordinarily painful stuff for me to confront.
And all of this, you said something earlier that I want to highlight, because I think it's everything that you're saying is just so spot on. And what I love about you is you are a survivor. You're not getting paid for this. This isn't what you do. You're not someone like me who's out there in the space constantly. You are someone who, you're not just a survivor. I'm going to put it this way. You are surviving, because you are still having to work out the residue and the pain that is still unfolding. But 100%. You said something that is so needed to be highlighted, is not having any regrets. Now, I know that you regret having to divorce. I know that you regret, nobody wants to put their kids through that. Nobody wants, but that was what you were forced to do out of self-protection. But talk about not having any regrets about the process. And I mean, you tried everything. You tried everything so much to where I was like, are you sure that this is what you want to do now? You have to, yeah. But you were willing to do anything for these two children, but yet talk about not having any regrets for what you were willing to do. Because I don't know that every man would have been willing to do what you were willing to do.
I want to hone in on something you just said that is so important, because it's something I thought about as I brainstormed intensely for this conversation, which is the concept of self-protection. Because that's what it came to a pivot point that I know you've discussed in multiple videos yourself, Sam, which is my mindset had to change from saving us to saving myself. And that ultimately is the reason I had to walk out. I had to, at that point, once I recognized very reluctantly the real possibility that I really was in a relationship with someone who at the very least was narcissistic, if not an outright narcissist. That's a separate conversation. It took me a long time to work through that. I had to protect myself. Okay. Once I walked out, and you mentioned that I'm still dealing with some of the pain here, despite the fact that I express the feeling that I have no regrets. I could at that point assure myself, Sam, that I really had done everything I could possibly think of to try and make this work, to try and push this across that magical finish line, beyond which, as you know, plenty of relationships and marriages have flourished on the other side of infidelity. I so badly wanted that. I wanted to believe that that magic was also at my fingertips. But Sam, it's only possible if both people are walking that same path hand in hand. You must have the courage and the straightforwardness of vision to recognize whether or not the person you are with truly is showing you a real commitment to restoring trust, to engaging in forthright, straightforward, at times very difficult, but clear communication about the issues that must be faced head on if there is any hope for the restoration of your relationship, least of all the restoration of trust between you. I was not seeing that, and I had to protect myself by enforcing that boundary and removing myself from an environment in which, as you, I think, saw, Sam, I was being destroyed.
Well, and you were not looking for, I mean, I want to paint a picture here.
Thank you.
I mean, you deliver information within your skill set that is just nuclear bomb, words of wisdom, just so much. And I know the betrayed males are so in step with you. I know the betrayed females are in step with you too, and hearing your heart. But what I love is you were willing to take almost breadcrumbs. I mean, we had several discussions where It was like, look, dude, like, here's breadcrumbs and here's what you're asking for, but I get it. I get it. And I think any man, especially men who have children, hit a point where they are so willing to just eat for the certain viewers that don't like cuss words, a crap sandwich, all in an attempt to save this little family.
Yeah.
And so as we kind of are about to land the plane, if you will, as you sit in this moment, as you are walking through this, and as much as you present confident and strong, it's agonizing. We've spent hours talking about the agony that you feel. And you are what one great friend of mine, Rick Reynolds, would say, kind of like a walking wounded, that you will always walk. We will always walk with a limp, but we're still walking. Yes. Yeah. And we're not afraid of our limps. We're not afraid of our scars, right? A great mentor of mine 30 years ago would say, I don't want to see a man's medals. I want to see his scars. And you and I have so many scars that we can talk about, but talk about life right now. How are you finding your way? Because the pain of divorce is filled with so much grief. But yet, I loved what you said, that there was a shift that you are now working on saving yourself. And it goes without saying, you're obviously working to help your children heal. But talk about your life right now.
Oh, helping my children heal, that's so important. And you've been so helpful in understanding that too. So I want to make sure I get to that. I love also the analogy of the limp, because I don't want to go too far with the analogy of warfare. I am not a military veteran, and I know that the experiences that real military veterans have far exceed those that I've endured merely through the experience of betrayal. That said, I do think the case can be made that I am essentially a wounded veteran of the emotional and psychological warfare that infidelity invites into our lives. Okay, I do believe that quite deeply. And because I recognize that, Sam, what I feel now is this now is not the time to rush into some other relationship. Now is not the time to flee into the arms of the first woman who will welcome me. Now is the time to stand on my own 2 feet and really do some honest work, figuring out who I am now at this moment in my life in the aftermath of easily the most destructive experience I've ever withstood. Before I can get to this place where I feel like I've got it together to the extent that I can maybe start tiptoeing in the direction of entertaining another relationship or whatever it might be. Now, here in the it's been a year since I walked out. I say it's been a year since I walked out, and that makes it sound black and white. I very quickly want to remind, make sure audiences are aware of what you know, Sam, which is I walked out, but the physical relationship between myself and my spouse didn't just end the day I walked out the door. That continued for months, and I realized in retrospect that was confusing things to a point that was in and of itself destructive. So I really only pulled away from this thing by like June. So it hasn't even been a year since I truly extricated myself from this relationship. And in that space, Sam, to me, this might not be true for every dude. I get it. But for me, the bottom line is, who am I now as a man, as an individual, apart from any codependency or any need on the embraces or approvals of anyone external to me? And while I'm figuring that out, Sam, as you just said, helping my kids heal, my foremost project right now, which is literally on my mind every day, is how to be the rock that my two small children absolutely must have me be for them at a time when they have gone through the trauma of tumultuous change that they too never asked for. And it's up to me to help them navigate that hand in hand, because it's not something that a 5-year-old girl and an 11-year-old girl, which is how old my kids are now, can do on their own, nor should any parent expect them to do any such thing.
And I think, it is not just admirable, but it is, it's contagious. What I find to be really contagious about you is your decision to say, look, this has not gone the way I wanted it to go, but it's gone the way it's gone. And I can rise up and meet the challenge and push through the grief, but yet not deny the grief, but feel the grief and love these two kids and love myself. And so I want the audience to know that I have always had such a part of my heart for the betrayed male, because it's so nuanced. And it's, as I said in the beginning, and as you have experienced firsthand, as a betrayed male, you just feel like you're on leper island, right? That nobody knows about, nobody talks about. And so you and I talked over a couple of glasses of whiskey that we're going to have you come in frequently, because you have so much to give the betrayed. And quite honestly, for the unfaithfuls that are listening, male or female, there is so much that you can learn from this man sharing his story. So I want to invite you to really tune in regularly, because I want Max to come in and to share his heart and to share his story as someone who is surviving this pain. So one question that and I didn't even tell you I was going to do this, but I believe so much in your calling and your next chapter. So if you were listening, driving in your car, if you were at home watching this and the roles were reversed, and if you were to find yourself a year and a half, 2 years ago or whatever, I want you to take just a moment and just reach out to the Maxes that feel like they're on leper island, like nobody really understands, and that feel so emasculated. And I just want you to share a minute with them as we close.
Certain lines of work that I'm involved in, Sam, it put me in conversation with men frequently. I do a lot of interviews in my work. I encounter a lot of people in my daily life and strike up conversations with them. And I have to say to you, the betrayed man who feels like you're on leper island, you are wrong. I'm telling you, I regularly, and I've said this to Sam for months, encounter men who, in passing, reveal that they too had a wife or a spouse be unfaithful to them. And at this point, it is with shocking regularity that I encounter these stories specifically from men. And I know that when you're trying to consume literature, online, videos, whatever, about infidelity, you probably, as I did, as I think most betrayed men feel, encounter too often that narrative from the perspective of the betrayed female. Now, I know that the betrayed female finds much to glean from a conversation like this, even though it's coming from a betrayed male. But I say that because the betrayed men feel isolated in large part because so much of what they consume in this space as they themselves try to heal too often is from the standpoint of the betrayed female. Here I am, man, and I'm telling you, we are not alone. I know that for a fact. Don't tell yourself that. I am telling you, it is not true. The whatever conditions there are that have led you to that assumption, they are misleading. So, Sam, it's so important what you say, that the betrayed man Although the betrayed man is associating deep, profound, incredibly painful shame with their experience, it should not lead to the assumption that shame is theirs and theirs alone. It's just not true. My practically daily experience absolutely corroborates that beyond the shadow of a doubt.
Oh, man, I love you so much. I just enjoy spending time with you. And I think there's so much that resonates with me and I hope that the audience understands. You don't have it all figured out. You haven't arrived. None of us, nobody over here has arrived. We're taking it one day at a time.
100%, dude.
Enjoying the life that we build for ourselves, or for those that come from faith, that they build with their faith and their God. But today I am so just grateful for you coming in. I'm grateful for how smart I am that I'm going to be bringing you in regularly. Just kidding. Just kidding. Somebody's going to run with that. I know. But really, I'm honored. And for those of you that are watching and listening, predominantly as a betrayed, and whether you're male or female, look, on behalf of Max and myself and millions of other betrayeds that are out there, we see you, we hear you, we know that you are in the deepest amount of agony and pain you may have ever been in your life, but you're not alone. And so if I can help, you can reach out to me at samshealingpodcast@gmail.com. You can leave a comment, you can like, you can follow. And Max, if they leave comments on the video on YouTube, I think it would be great for you to just come in and maybe chime in a little bit if they have questions. But Absolutely. You're going to come in again, whether you like it or not, you're going to come in again. I don't care if I have to take this microphone and sit in that little bar that we sat in. We'll do a podcast right there at the bar. But on behalf of just our whole community, thank you for coming in. And for those of you that are watching and listening, we are so grateful that you tuned in today. We wish you nothing but healing and courage. And I'll see you next time on Sam's Healing Podcast.